for energy, oil and gas expert. I'll tell you what I'll do, Robert. I will let you take a minute and just tell us who you are. That way I don't miss something. And then we'll get into the questions.
Okay, sounds good. I'm Robert Rapier. Like Mr. Global, I grew up in Oklahoma. I was born and raised there. I grew up on a ranch there. I put myself through college, got degrees in math, chemistry, and chemical engineering. I got my master's degree from Texas A&M University. Went to work in Corpus Christi first for the German chemical giant Herbst. They sent me to Germany for a couple of years. Came back to Houston, went to Oklahoma, went to work for ConocoPhillips, went to Billings, Montana, worked in a refinery there, and they sent me to the North Sea. And from there, I jumped from Scotland, Aberdeen, Scotland, over to the Netherlands. And from there, I got poached by a guy in Hawaii. I went to work for a very wealthy guy in Hawaii doing due diligence for him on energy projects. And he sent me all over the world. So I've spent a lot of my career looking at projects and just trying to figure out, what's real and what's not. I had to look at everything with a really skeptical eye because he was investing a lot of money and he wanted to know, are there flaws, concerns, who's telling the truth and who's not. So that's what I spent time doing. And that's how I ended up here in Arizona. He sent me here for a project to babysit, and they ended up hiring me. And so I've been here now for nearly 10 years, I guess.
Cool. Well, this is very important, or so I've been told. Do you have an oil and gas expert ID card?
I don't. I mean, I've got all kinds of, I've got all kinds of cards. I was looking, I've got a Bosiet card for North Sea when I was going to offshore oil platforms because they want to make sure if a helicopter falls out of the sky, you know how to get out of it. But, I think most of the time that happens, people aren't getting out of them. So, but that was pretty interesting going through that. But yeah, expert is somebody who's done it for a long time and has been paid to do it. That's what makes an expert. There's lots of experts with no degree or anything, just done it for a very long time. I worked for a guy in Germany who was just a high school graduate, but he had been running that. He started out an operator in the plant, and he ended up managing the plant just because he knew, his stuff, and he was really good at what he did. So, you do your thing, you're right, you make good decisions, and over time you develop a reputation as an expert.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't ever like to refer to myself. Okay, I got a hat on. I don't ever like to refer to myself as an expert. I let other people say that, but I always, I realize that people recognize me as an expert, but I don't usually introduce myself that way. But I leave that to others.
Yeah. So for me, before I got on this app, I didn't either.
Yeah.
Before I got on this app, I didn't either. And the reason I did it on this app was to let someone know that, hey, I'm not some guy living in his mom's basement watching, getting misinformation off the internet. Like you're speaking to someone who has been validated by other experts in the industry. So that's why I use it on this app. But yeah, I honestly don't like using it either because it does create conflict, just the use of it. So,
yeah. Well, so I grow up like I did, and my dad always taught me, don't brag. And so it always feels a little like bragging. I know it's not, but it still kind of feels that way. I don't think I've ever introduced myself as I'm an expert in this, but a lot of people refer to me that way, and I realize that that's how they recognize me.
Yeah. So the first thing we're going to focus on is misinformation. Okay. And you may remember this, you may not, but in 2011, you said, ignorance is the basis for bad energy policy.
Right.
And you said that in a 2011 I believe it was a Forbes article. And we've had a lot of bad energy policy since you have said that. I don't know if you're like Nostradamus or what, but that when I read that thing that you said, I thought, wow, what? And I think about it today. I just thought this guy's predicting the future almost. So what I want to do is basically I'm going to say something that is claims we've heard from politicians, from the media, things that have been spread out. Some of them may be true, some of them may be false, but I'm going to say something, and then you can say true, false, partly true, whatever, and then you can explain why it is or isn't what it is. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's the first claim. The Keystone XL is just a shortcut to the Gulf of Mexico to send oil to China.
So just about every claim you have to say, well, it needs to be in context. So would some oil have gone through? Yeah, probably. The Keystone XL was also going to pick up oil from North Dakota. There was going to be some oil coming there, but the oil is going to go to wherever the market is. And if China wants to pay more for the oil, then it might cut across the United States and end up going to China, but not all of it for sure. And it would be a local supply to the U.S. I mean, it would be cheaper certainly for U.S. Refiners to buy that oil than for China because they don't have all the transportation costs. So yeah, you could say, like everything, there's a nugget of truth there. You could say, yes, some of it might, but none of it was earmarked for China. I mean, it was just going to go wherever the market was, so partly true, mostly false.
Good answer. Good answer. How about this? You cannot make gasoline from tar sands oil.
Sure you can. I mean, you can make gasoline. I mean, you can make gasoline from coal. You can make gasoline from all kinds of things. Actually, tar sands oil, it ends up getting processed in Canada generally first, and it ends up getting shipped out as a much lighter oil. Now, refiners, I worked in a refinery in Billings, Montana. We actually preferred heavy oil. And people say, well, that's junk. Well, that's the point. The point is it was $30 a barrel cheaper than light sweet crude. And the refinery had invested billions of dollars into being able to process that. And so, we'd take that heavy sour crude and we'd crack it and we'd clean up the sulfur. And the margins on that oil were much higher than, paying $30 more for the light sweet stuff. So, yeah, I mean, you can certainly, it just depends on the refinery configuration.
Exactly. What's another one? Some certain person said, and you know who it is, I filled up the SPR to the very tippy top.
Right. Well, that's false. I mean, and that's easily checkable. And I think maybe he would like to have done that and got maybe confused about, what he wanted to do and what he actually did. We're talking about Trump, of course, and when he was in office, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve volume declined while he was in office, and it was nearly full when he got into office. And you can check, this is available as public information. It's not a secret. You can go in and you can look and you can see what the level was when he got in there, and you can see what it was when he left. And yet to this day, he'll go in and say, I filled it up, and and it's just not true. Now, it is true that he wanted to. It is true that maybe he might have liked to, but it certainly wasn't empty when he got in there. It was nearly full whenever he took office. But the reality is the level declined while he was in office.
Exactly. And just to keep it even, we'll go with the opposition president who said, I quote, they are not drilling when talking about ExxonMobil in 2022. He said oil companies were not drilling in the United States.
Yeah, and that's absolutely false. All you have to do is look at the rig counts. There was a pretty big disruption from COVID, and that really shook the markets up. And, oil companies can remember when OPEC declared a price war on them in 2014, 2015, and a lot of companies went bankrupt, and they've been a little bit more disciplined about spending in recent years. And so when COVID knocked the bottom out of the market, the drilling rigs plummeted, but now they have steadily come back. And so if you say ExxonMobil's not drilling, well, just look at the rig counts. I mean, the rig counts, I looked at the numbers the other day. They were up, they doubled within, a year, 18 months or something. What is true though, they didn't get back to the pre-COVID levels. And, if you're ExxonMobil, and people forget these are companies, they're trying to make money. I mean, we don't like that they make money at our expense. We don't like paying a lot for gasoline, but, they don't want to over drill. They don't want to crash the price. And I think, that's what the current president would like to see. He'd like to see them going out, all out drilling, and it doesn't matter if they make any money. It just matters if people are getting cheap gasoline.
Yeah. And a lot of people fail to recognize that the industry went through 3 major crashes within a 5-year period, basically at the time he was making that statement. We had 2015 and 2016, which was one of the largest crashes in U.S. history. We had 2018, and then we had COVID. So the industry had been through many, many crashes. The availability of services in the industry in 2021 and 2022 was not there. If oil companies wanted to ramp up and drill a bunch of wells, they literally couldn't. You couldn't get the casing. You couldn't get the rigs. You couldn't procure the things you needed to drill, even if you wanted to. I spoke to many people throughout the industry who said, we want to drill 80 wells this year, but we're only going to get 50 drilled because we can't get the casing or we can't get this. So there was a lot of supply chain problems in the industry at that time, just like there was, in the food industry and every other industry that was experiencing that. Would you agree with that statement?
Right, absolutely. I mean, even manpower, there's a lot of people have left the industry over the years because they don't like the ups and downs and the instability. And, there was serious shortage of manpower for a long time. And lots of inflation in oilfield services and, a lot of COVID disruptions. I know that my company had trouble getting parts at times during the pandemic. There were places that were shut down, parts were back ordered. We might see a 10-month wait for something critical that we needed. And, that affects everything. It affects the ability to go out and drill and frack and get the oil out of the ground.
Absolutely. So here's another one. Oil companies set the price for oil or gas. You can address either one or both.
Sure. I mean, I ask people, do they think Apple sets the price of Apple stock? I mean, if you say Apple stock is $200, that's too much. Who do you think is setting the price of that? It's the people out buying Apple stock. That's how the price is set. And tomorrow it could crash or it could surge. And that's basically the way oil prices are set. And a lot of people say, well, oil is based on supply and demand. And I say, well, not exactly. It's based on the short-term expectations of supply and demand. Whatever we think is about to happen, that usually affects oil prices. And, if we see a hurricane coming through the Gulf, suddenly we'll see a spike in oil prices. And that is because of the expectations. Some oil rigs are going to go offline and we're going to see a decline in supply for a little while. But ExxonMobil has so many different grades of oil and so many different wells and so forth. They can't go out and try to price oil on all those. So it's priced based on the market. And if oil companies set prices, they would never lose money. And they do lose money. They lost a lot of money in 2020, and they regularly have years where they lose a lot of money and a lot of them go bankrupt. So that's the craziest thing is to think. I mean, people just don't get how prices are set, or they think the gas station at the corner, they've got some leeway. The gas station at the corner has some leeway, but if you see oil prices, go up 20%, of course your corner gas station is going to have to go up. Their costs are going to go up, but the guy at the corner is not gouging you. He's not making a whole lot on those gallons of gasoline. He's making more on the chips and the Mountain Dew than he is on the gasoline that they sell.
So that leads right into the next one, because you know there was an attempt to pass legislation to stop price gouging against the oil industry, and I have repeatedly told people that if there was something nefarious going on with the oil companies, it actually wouldn't be price fixing, it would, or price gouging, it would be price fixing. And price fixing is already illegal. And that's why I felt like the whole price gouging narrative and the legislation around it was just a big ruse. It really was, because if oil companies were working together to keep prices up, that is price fixing, not price gouging, and that's already illegal. Okay. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. Here's a point I make about price gouging. They investigate over and over again, and every time they come back and say it found that it was market factors that affected the price. They don't ever get anybody for price gouging. Here's an example I've used before. Let's say you live in a neighborhood and you bought your house for $100,000, and over the next 5 years, the average price in the neighborhood went to $250,000, and now you want to move and you want to sell your house. What do you sell your house for? Do you sell your house for $250,000 like the rest of the houses in the neighborhood? And if so, aren't you price gouging? I mean, you bought for $100,000, you're selling for $250,000. That's ridiculous. But you're selling at the market. You're selling at what the other houses. And here's what would happen if you went out and you said, I'm not going to be greedy. I know the market's $250,000. I'm going to sell my home for $150,000. Somebody would buy it immediately and sell it for $250,000. So you can't underprice the market, supply and demand. And that's why price gouging investigations always go nowhere. They say, well, no, we looked at it, and it's rare that a person could price gouge, but here's how they do it. If supplies were adequate, let's say there's a hurricane, supplies are adequate, the guy's got plenty of fuel, and he just raises the price because he can. He takes it from $2 to $4 because he can. Now, what you would usually see, they would do that because they're afraid they're going to run out. They're afraid they're not going to get deliveries, and that's why price usually spikes. But if you could find a case where a guy had plenty of fuel and he just jacked the price up because he thought he could get away with it, that would be price gouging. And that's usually not what they find when they go and they look.
Right. So here's another one. Windmills never produce the energy that it takes to build them. Or let me back up, wind turbines. Some people don't like the term windmills. Wind turbines never produce the energy that it takes to produce them.
Yeah, I think that's false. I mean, anytime you're doing an energy balance, you have to go and you have to do, the full accounting all the way through to, dismantling and disposing of the turbines. But I think every, credible analysis has looked at it and said, yeah, they do pay back their energy. Now, you compare it to oil and gas, that's a different story. You don't have to have that much of a big input of energy to pull oil out of the ground and refine it and turn into gasoline. So for your energy expended, oil and gas has just been a bonanza. I mean, that's what's allowed, the agricultural revolution, the green revolution, the whole, the world is the population it is because of our exploitation of oil and gas. And let me be clear, that hasn't been all good. There's a lot of downsides. And I tell people, I wish we didn't have to burn oil. I wish we weren't spewing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But the reality is we've built a society that's based on it. And so if we tried to stop right now, let's just say tomorrow, all oil and gas companies stop producing. Within 30 days, people would start starving. I mean, it would be a mass casualty event if oil and gas companies stop producing. And so, my philosophy has always been try to do everything you can to nudge us away from there. And build out the renewables and provide incentives for people to shift away. And, let's try to get off oil and gas as fast as we can. But the reality is we're dependent and we're going to be dependent for a while. It's like, a severe alcoholic going cold turkey can kill them. The alcoholism may be killing them, but the, going cold turkey can kill them. Same with a drug addict, going cold turkey can kill somebody. And that's why a lot of these things, you've got to wean off of them. And it would same be for oil and gas. You know, I don't know if we're going to talk about Keystone anymore, but that was my big deal about the Keystone pipeline. If you say, you know, we don't need the Keystone pipeline because we're going to renewables. And my comment was, or my position was, well, so what? You've got a private company that's building the pipeline, that's going to spend the money, that's going to employ Americans, that's going to buy American goods and services to buy that pipeline. And so, yes, work hard so that it's never needed. And, you know, if it isn't, then that was on, you know, TransCanada at the time. That's their loss. That's, you know, but in the meantime, it's there as an insurance policy. So if we get down the road and we still are seriously dependent on that oil, we're not getting it from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia now. We're getting it from Canada. And that was always my thing. You know, it's an insurance policy against OPEC, against Russia, you know, the places that have most of the world's remaining oil reserves, you know, that would have helped. And if we didn't need it, that's on TransCanada. I mean, they're not out having government funds to produce to build this thing. It's a private company building it and employing people. So, you know, let it go. And if you don't need it, you don't need it, and it's on them.
Yeah, and I'll be, you know, I've caught quite a bit of flack for supporting the Keystone XL. I was hoping that they could resolve, you know, the land issues with the tribes and those things. I was hoping that would get resolved, whether by rerouting it or coming to some agreement. But when people look at our industry, they don't think of, you know, the global, you know, geopolitical strategic importance of it. And that's why I supported the Keystone XL, because of that, what you just said right there. It would give us an extra layer of protection from countries that we don't so much rely on their oil as we rely on their price. And I tell people this all the time. We don't rely on oil from Saudi Arabia to run this country. We rely on OPEC to keep the prices affordable. That's what we rely on them for, because it's a global commodity. And the reason that I supported the XL was all about strategy. It had nothing to do with whether you know, how much of it we used, how much was exported, none of that. It had nothing to do with, you know, and sometimes you have to look at those big pictures when you're looking at projects like this. When you're talking about, you know, true energy independence, how does that impact that? And yeah, it's foreign oil from Canada, but it would give us, I would rather get oil from Canada than I would OPEC. And I think everyone can agree on that.
They're our closest trading partner. You'd much rather have a supply there. You know, why is Saudi Arabia so rich? For many, many years, there was a massive outflow of cash from the U.S. and from other countries into Saudi Arabia and into OPEC countries. That's how they became so wealthy. And so, you know, now with the fracking boom and with the big surge of oil production in the U.S., we don't import much OPEC oil anymore. We don't import that much from Saudi Arabia. And it would be a good thing if we don't resume doing that. And that's one of the things, you know, if I had to import oil, you're right, I'd rather get it from Canada than from countries that in many cases don't like us very much.
Right.
Countries that might use that money to you know, wage war against us in some cases.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about, because here is the next controversy that I see coming down the pipeline. Just starting to hear whispers of it, but I think it's going to be a big controversy in the next couple of years. And you probably already know what I'm talking about. It's LNG, and specifically CP2, which I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a new LNG terminal that they want to put down on the Gulf Coast. I've seen some outrageous misinformation on that. Like, this one terminal puts out more emissions than like 280 coal-fired plants or something. Let's talk a little bit about just the real impacts of LNG, why it is so important to get it around the world, and its emissions, because people want to know about its emissions and how it compares to coal regarding CO2 and methane.
Okay, so that's very important. It's very important to understand the parameters around this. When you burn LNG, per BTU, it's something like half of what coal is. So if we could displace coal-fired power plants with plants running on natural gas, the emissions from the plant would be around half per unit of electricity produced. Now, where the detractors come in, they say, yeah, but if you have a lot of leaks, methane is a very strong greenhouse gas, and that's true. And so, the issue is, and there have been a lot of not objective analysis. There have been some advocates out there that try to take a worst case scenario for leaks and say, if this is the situation, this is worse than a coal-fired power plant. And yes, if you've got methane, spewing into the atmosphere, that's very bad. But if you look at the EPA, they've got their own leak estimates, and you apply those. LNG comes in way, way below coal. And if you want to know why, CO2 emissions in the atmosphere are surging, it's because mainly of coal consumption in Southeast Asia. And I've done a lot of graphics on that. The coal U.S. CO2 emissions have been pretty flat for about 50 years. We haven't changed all that much. But in the Asia Pacific region, they now emit more than the United States and the EU combined, and it's just steadily climbing higher. And it's mainly because of coal. And if you're sitting in their shoes, though, you're going, hey, you guys developed on coal. Europe developed on coal. Why shouldn't we be able to develop on coal? And that's an understandable position, except you're going to kill us all. I mean, I'm sorry for what we did, but the reality is the atmosphere doesn't care. It only cares about how much CO2 is coming up. And if you say, hey, it's not fair that you use coal and now we can't, well, the reality is, we're in a bind now. And, unless the U.S. can invent something to suck CO2 right out of the air, outside of planting 1 trillion trees, we need to help those countries get off of coal and get onto LNG and nuclear power and, as many renewables as they can, because that's really where the lowest hanging fruit is for getting CO2 emissions down.
Yeah, it is. And this is what I've communicated to others is it is the low hanging fruit, and it does us no good to reduce emissions in the United States if we're not figuring out ways to help other countries around the world reduce theirs. And it is not, it's just not in the stars for India to be totally renewable. That's just not a thing. That's right. That's not a thing. But what is a thing is getting these countries, especially emerging countries, reduce their dependence on coal and get that LNG to them. One, it supports the United States. It supports American jobs. It's American tax revenue, but it also helps reduce global emissions. Because as I said, if we do this alone, we're doing nothing. We're doing nothing if we do this alone. So it's
at the same time, I would acknowledge the critics are right. If you don't stay on top of the methane leaks and you allow, there's some countries that just spew methane out of unlit flares. You can't do that. You have to be on top of the methane because it is a very strong, it doesn't hang around in the atmosphere as long as CO2. It's got a shorter lifetime up there. But while it's up there, it is 20 times or something more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. So the critics are right about that. It's just that a lot of times they are not critics, they're advocates and activists, and they're not really using objective numbers. They're going with the worst case scenario and then trying to say LNG is worse than coal. And then when you do that and it's not based on a credible analysis, you really hurt yourself, because then people say, well, why should I convert from coal then if it's just as bad?
right. So one position I've taken, and I haven't heard your position on this, but one position that I have taken is that basically legal action in this country taken against companies trying to build new refineries has done more to hurt the environment than help it, because new refineries are so much cleaner than the old. We have a very old refinery system in this country. A lot of our refineries were built decades and decades. We have refineries running that were built in the early 1900s. So when NGOs is what we call them, non-government organizations, when they take legal action against people constantly, against companies trying to build new refineries, and that's one of the big reasons we haven't gotten a lot of new refineries in this country, it's actually more harmful to the environment because now we're relying on this old technology to do something that new technology could do much cleaner. I'm very excited about, I went up to Cushing to visit a fellow named Bruce Johnson, the director of economic development for Cushing, Oklahoma, where they're getting that new 100% renewable refinery. Super excited about that. But what are your thoughts on basically that argument that I've been making that those legal actions and those positions that these NGOs have taken have done more harm to the environment than good?
So I've taken a very similar position on doing projects in the U.S. If you're going to be dependent on oil, you want to produce as much of that oil here and get as much from Canada as you can, because we have very high environmental standards and we have very high safety standards. And if you need a barrel of oil and you get it instead from, Saudi Arabia, or, China's a major oil producer as well. They just use all the oil they have, but the safety standards there are not the same. The environmental standards are not the same. I mean, you may see things getting dumped right into a river there where, if they did that here, people go to jail. So yes, do projects where, environmental standards are high and you got, worker protections and so forth. And we have those here in the U.S. and not every country does. I mean, some countries just throw bodies at the problem and people die, they die. And that, that's a pretty serious thing here. I used to work at ConocoPhillips. We knew exactly, when somebody died, we knew about it, and we, it was communicated company-wide and what the problem was. There were investigations and changes were made to try to make sure that didn't happen again. And I think people don't realize that. It is a dangerous thing. When you've got high-pressure liquids and gases, flammable in lines, bad things happen. And so we have to be very, very cognizant of that, and a tremendous amount of work goes into safety engineering in the U.S. oil and gas industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So since we're on refining, I want to get your thoughts. So in 2022, we had record gas prices, and everyone was blaming everything they could think of. In your opinion, what are, we'll say the top two things, what are the top two things that drove us to record gas prices in 2022?
Okay, so the single biggest issue, you've got to go back to COVID. I saw a comment go by and somebody said, why don't you address the fact that gas prices were lower under Trump? I'll address that. For years, gas prices have trended down as fracking has brought more and more supply online. So, 2010, 2012, oil prices were still $100 a barrel. And that got broken as fracking put more and more oil on the market. And so that steadily declined over time. And what happened was in 2020, we're producing a record amount of oil in 2020, just ahead of COVID. And COVID knocked the bottom out of the oil market. Oil prices actually went negative. And if people will look on the chart, and you addressed it one day, during Trump's administration, the oil industry lost 3 million barrels a day of production. That was enormous. That's the biggest short-term loss we've ever seen. Now, it wasn't Trump's fault. It was COVID's fault. It was the fault that, we had the stay-at-home orders, demand dropped. And then suddenly, and you can address this better than I can, but suddenly a bunch of oil production went offline. Some of it went offline permanently. Some oil producers shut down. Some wells were capped. A lot of production went down, and producers got scared. And so whenever things came back, demand came back very quickly, and supply was much slower to come online. And so what you see, people who say, gas prices surged under Biden, I point out they went up 40% in the last 5 months of Trump, and they don't realize that. We were already we were already going straight up. That wasn't going to change. If Trump had been reelected, that was not going to change. The die had been cast. Demand recovered, supply was trying to catch up. So we were already in a situation where prices were surging, and it wasn't just in the U.S. It was everywhere. The whole world suffered massive inflation, and people forget that. We actually were kind of in the middle of the pack in the U.S. But then Russia invaded Ukraine, and so we're dealing with this issue. Russia invades Ukraine, and some people will say, what was Biden's fault? I said, well, Biden did make the decision to stop importing Russian finished products. Now, that was a Biden decision. We can argue whether it was the right decision. I think it was probably the right decision. But what happened was that severely disrupted the refining industry. And my old boss at ConocoPhillips in Billings, he runs one of the refineries out in California. He said it was a major nightmare for them. He said, they were getting a lot of diesel, finished diesel from and products that they can make diesel out of from Russia, and suddenly that's gone. And so suddenly diesel prices are skyrocketing because they don't have enough diesel. Now, given time, this can all be worked out. Given time, it's a global market, and these situations will, settle down over time. But in the short term, that caused a huge run-up last year that just couldn't be plugged easily. Now, that is directly a consequence of Russia invading Ukraine and the subsequent disruptions, which, yes, Biden made a decision. He said, hey, we're not going to support this. We're going to, and it hurt. It did drive up prices. He reacted to that by tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And that arguably helped bring oil prices to a halt, the rise in oil price to a halt and come back down, but at the expense of depleting the Strategic Petroleum Reserve significantly. And your point is, I think what you were leading into it with, we've also lost refining capacity, and that's true as well. We have lost refining capacity in the U.S. If people feel like the oil and gas industry is like printing money, you have to ask yourself, why are refineries shutting down? The refining business is boom and bust, and it's a hard business. It's not always big, fat, huge margins. It's sometimes negative margins, and refineries shutting down.
Yeah. So I personally, I don't know if you've heard this, but I've attributed a lot of it to the OPEC 2020 production cut deal, the two-year deal. And, OPEC did slowly increase production before the end of that 2-year deal, but I never could, for the life of me, figure out why we would agree to a 2-year production cut. OPEC has never done that in history. They usually do like a 3-month deal. Hey, we're going to do this for 3 months, maybe 6 months, see how the market plays out, and see, and then we'll come back and reevaluate. That's how it's always been done. And that 2-year production cut, in my opinion, played a huge piece of that because it gave OPEC so much more control over our prices. It literally handed them all of this control. And then, the vaccines came out, demand roared back, and OPEC had us, by the neck, basically. They could increase production as slow or as fast as they wanted to, and we were completely under their control because we had lost so much production in the United States.
Well, so I always like to say, what is the other person thinking? What is OPEC thinking? And they saw the bottom fall out of demand, and Trump did go to them and say, hey, this price drop is killing us. Could you cut production? And from OPEC's perspective, that's a win-win. I mean, if they cut production, they're going to prop the price back up. And I've always said that, we Americans tend not to like OPEC, but OPEC has done a lot of favors for the U.S. oil and gas industry. I mean, when OPEC is out there cutting production, who does it benefit? It benefits ExxonMobil and Chevron and Shell. And it hurts consumers, and consumers get mad and angry. But OPEC, I tell people all the time, ExxonMobil can't control prices. Chevron can't control prices. OPEC can. OPEC can go out and they could, literally, if OPEC wanted to, if they decided to, they could drive oil prices to $200, really quickly. It would be devastating for the global economy, and that's why they don't do it. But, they still produce, 40% of the world's oil and have 70% of the oil's reserves. So they're still very, very powerful when it comes to setting prices. ExxonMobil is not a drop in the bucket when compared to the power of OPEC and what OPEC could do. ExxonMobil could shut down all their oil production tomorrow, and it would have very little impact on oil prices. But OPEC could go out and shut down 10%, and prices would soar.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, so how do you feel about the idea of drill, baby, drill? The idea that we can simply drill our way out of high oil prices? Because what we've seen in the last probably 10 years is that as we increase production, OPEC just lowers it to offset it and to keep prices elevated. So should we be focusing more on drilling? Should we be focusing more on refining capacity? Should we be focusing more on fuel efficiency? What should we be focusing on, Robert? What should we be focusing on to get, because I believe we can have healthy gas prices or healthy oil prices that are good for US producers and also have healthy gas prices that are good for consumers. And I think that is, in my opinion, the ultimate goal that we should want to reach. How do you think we achieve that?
So we've got to be doing everything. I mean, in the long run, where are we headed? In the long run, and you talked about me telling the future. In 2007, I wrote an article called "The Future is Solar." And I made the argument then that eventually, all of our energy is going to come from solar power, whether, via wind or whatever, but eventually that's where things are headed in the long run. So, but we're not there now. We're not there now, but we have to figure out a way to get there. And I've proposed something multiple times, and we've never talked about this, so you may completely disagree, but I've said, why don't you lower our income tax rates and jack up the gas tax, and then, use revenues there to fund renewables and speed up the transition here. So the idea would be your tax rate doesn't change, your tax level doesn't change at all. We're just going to shift it. We're going to shift it from income-based to more consumption-based. And we're going to give you incentives then to stop consuming so much. So it's just, you tax what you want people to do less of, and you incentivize what you want them to do more of. And that would have the incentive, the effect of kind of nudging people to, become more fuel efficient, to, electric vehicles when they can, conservation. And then, you could potentially, you got more money in your pocket because now, it's what they do in Europe. If you go to Europe, you look around, you see these small fuel efficient vehicles all over the roads. We don't have the massive vehicles and people commuting 40 miles each way to work, because that's not the way their society is designed. They when we were paying $1 a gallon, I was living in Germany, they were paying $4 a gallon. Believe me, I wasn't driving a car that got 15 miles a gallon. I had a very fuel efficient small car because, it's hitting me in the pocketbook. And I don't want to have a regressive tax here that hurts people. And there are a lot of different ways you could do it, but I would have some way of causing people to say, maybe I need to back off a little bit on my consumption or figure out ways to reduce my consumption, because that will be, financially beneficial to me, while, shoveling some of those dollars into, moving away from it, moving away from, getting off of oil.
Yeah, and that's yeah, the reduction of the income tax and basically placing that on fuel is not something I've thought of.
Well, another way to
One
do it,
idea that I did,
I think the way I
go
argued
ahead.
it was to give people a tax credit. So say the average consumption of gasoline in the country, I think, is 1,200 gallons for a family or something like that. And say, okay, we're going to raise the gas tax by $1 a gallon, and we're going to give every family $1,200. So if you consume exactly the amount of gasoline you've always consumed, you're going to get that back in a tax rebate. But if you figure out a way to reduce your consumption, you've made a profit now. You're doing better off than you were, and it would slow down the growth of consumption in this country. Probably reverse it. Probably start to decline. It's not my idea to. I don't want to tax people more. I don't like taxes at all. But sometimes you have to nudge to get people to do what you want them to do.
Right. So what are going to be, a lot of people try to predict this. This is one thing, I I will tell people when gas prices are about to fall. I'll tell people, hey, oil's going to hit $90 by this day. One thing nobody can stick me on or try to pin me down on is when we hit peak oil demand, because there are so many variables involved, and a lot of people try to predict it, but I don't think any of us have the information we need to accurately do that. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do you think it's coming sooner or later? Because the differences in people's opinions are vast. Some people think it's going to be next year. Some people think it's going to be 10 years. So what is a pragmatic, estimate that you think makes sense?
Yeah, so Bloomberg wrote an article in 2015 and said by 2022, oil will be in a terminal decline. And they based that on a really faulty analysis. They overestimated how many electric vehicles would be out there and so forth. And I called them out in Forbes. I said, this is positively ludicrous. That's never going to happen. And in fact, I think oil demand was 2 million barrels a day higher than they thought it would be when 2022 rolled around. So the trajectory we're on right now, the International Energy Agency last month released their World Energy Outlook. And the headline was, peak energy demand by 2030, or peak fossil fuel demand by 2030. And so a lot of people read that to mean, well, oil demand is going to peak soon. But if you look into the actual tables, they're only predicting a peak in coal. Oil demand, they predicted was going to go up, and natural gas demand was going to go up. So, based on the trajectory we're on right now, I don't see oil demand peaking before 2030, but it's going to be a function of price. It's always a function of price. I mean, if oil prices were $200 tomorrow, oil demand's probably peaked. If, we'd probably see oil demand start to decline. And, so it's always a function of price. And I used to be very active on the peak oil boards, the oil drum back in the day. I was a writer on the oil drum. And I was one of the most contentious ones on there because they were all saying, Saudi and Matt Simmons and Twilight in the Desert, oil production is about to fall off a terminal cliff. And I would say that's not true. It's not what I see from here. And they didn't like it because a lot of people have that doomer mindset. And so I was contradicting that. I said, there's still a lot more oil. Saudi is sitting on a lot of oil. They're withholding production right now. So I said, I think you're misreading the signs. And I think Matt Simmons was misreading the signs. And I had people I respected a lot with PhDs who thought that Saudi oil production in 2005, they were predicting by 2010 it would be below 7 million barrels a day. And I said, that's ludicrous. They are sitting on so much oil and they are withholding production right now. So, it's hard to predict the future. And it's always, it depends on policy and it depends on price. And those two things are linked.
Yeah. And I just want to be clear to the people in the comment section. We're talking about global oil demand. And so often what I run into is when I'm having discussions about these kinds of things, people think we're just talking about the United States. And when I talk about stuff like this, I'm never just talking about the United States, because the truth is, it doesn't matter just in the United States. It doesn't matter. If the United States if tomorrow was peak oil demand in the United States, it wouldn't matter to global oil demand, because there are emerging countries all over the world who are increasing their energy needs every single year. There's, you think about, there's countries 30, 40 years behind us in their, industrialization age or whatever you want to call it. They're that far behind us, and their energy needs are only going to grow and grow and grow, and they're going to be using the things that we used to use. So, we're not talking about just the United States only. We're talking about globally, and that's important. That's important.
Right. And the U.S. is becoming less and less important as far as a consumer, because as a fraction of the whole, we are declining as some of these countries ramp up. And what we do we become less able to impact, the bottom line. I did an analysis a few years ago. I said, if U.S. emissions entirely ceased, it would only be a pause for, I think 5 or 6 years before it caught right back up to where we were, because that trajectory, that growth was so strong that, I think the world was adding the equivalent of U.S. emissions every 5 or 10 years. It was what we're doing at this point. We just can't move the needle.
Right. So a lot of people are currently saying that the underinvestment in the industry is going to lead to very high prices in the future, because as demand increases, the underinvestment that's happening now is going to impact us later as demand decreases. Would you like to speak on that?
Yeah, that's been the case again and again and again. I mean, the reason the oil industry is boom and bust is because that's what happens. You get prices crash because too much production for demand at the time. Prices crash. Oil companies stop investing or greatly curtail their investments. A few years later, demand catches up and suddenly prices skyrocket. And now the capital budgets pick up again, but it takes years for that. So we see these, big swings over time, up and down. And that's been the history of the oil industry since the very beginning. And another thing related to that, this is why I say presidents don't have a lot of impact, short-term impact on oil production or gas prices, because the policies that they implement will take years to really have a big impact. And I always use Nixon as an example, because Nixon cleared away all of the red tape for the Alaska pipeline. He did that. He made that possible. And then Carter came along, the Alaska pipeline turned on, and suddenly U.S. oil production started to rise. And that was because of things that happened years before. A lot of people may not know this. The most oil production gain we've ever had in the history of the U.S. came under Obama. Now, Obama was not famously known as a friend of the oil and gas industry, but he just happened to be sitting in office when years of fracking development started to pay off in his first year in office. We saw, 35 years of declines in U.S. oil production flatten out and start higher. And for the first 7 years he was in office, oil production rose in the U.S. That's never happened in any other presidency ever in the history of the U.S. And so, I say the great irony is always that George Bush was the oil man and production declined all 8 years he was in office. And then Obama comes along and production goes up. And it would be easy to mix up cause and effect there and say, and Obama did at times take credit for it. He said, hey, look, oil production has gone up. And I suspect next year, Biden will take credit for what will be a record year this year. We're going to set a record for oil production this year. We set a record for oil production in October, a record month, and it eclipsed the previous month, which happened under Trump, and the previous year happened under Trump. But before that, there'd been a series of records that happened under Obama. So we had a trajectory where we're going more and more oil production. Our net imports are going down and down and down and down, and finally went to negative, if that's your definition of energy independence, under Trump. And that's why he claims, hey, I made us energy independent. Well, you happen to be sitting in office, but it didn't matter who was sitting in office. That was a trajectory that had been going on for 15 years.
Yeah. And I've given a lot of credit to the energy bill that was passed under the Bush administration for where we are today. Not only did it, unlock a lot of oil and gas development because it came along as the same time as this technology was maturing, but it also laid a foundation for renewable energy as well. A lot of people don't realize how much of that legislation was about renewable energy, and that came from a Republican administration. And, if not for renewable energy, all of these claims that we're making right now around energy independence, we wouldn't be having those conversations. You know very well how many quadrillion BTUs of renewable energy we produce every year and how much that is increasing every year. And I give the Bush administration a lot of credit for that energy bill. I did a video about it a while back. It's a great example of when both parties got together and worked on something. The Democrats got their renewables that they wanted. The Republicans got their fossil fuels they wanted. And it turned out to be what I consider to be a great piece of legislation.
Right. So Cheney always gets ripped because, people say, well, they went and carved up Iraq and gave all the pieces to the big oil companies. Ironically, none of them got any drilling concessions after, the war was over. But my book is up here somewhere. There it is. So in this book, I talk about what you just said. So that's the book. It's a little dated now. I wrote it in 2012, But I cover that, and I cover the things that Cheney put in that energy bill. And people don't realize how many incentives there were for renewable energy. And people may not like ethanol, and but that was a major piece of that bill. You saw ethanol production in the U.S. start to ramp up dramatically under Bush. You saw a lot of things that he put in place. He was way ahead of himself with the whole hydrogen economy. We were going to have a hydrogen economy, I think, in his 2001 or 2 State of the Union address. But he's a little ahead of himself there. But he wasn't just oil and gas, and Cheney wasn't just oil and gas. They went in and said, what all energy, what do we need energy wise? What do we need to do? There was a lot of efficiency stuff in that bill.
Yeah. And I've gotten a lot of questions recently about, and a lot of people in the comment section won't know what this is, so we're going to have to explain it to them. But I've gotten a lot of questions recently about the renewable fuel standards. And these were fuel standards that I think they were a part of that actual original energy bill that we're talking about with George Bush. And I think they were updated later under Obama. But basically they state you have to have a certain amount of renewable type fuel, like a biofuel, in every gallon of gasoline. And as the years go by, it is progressive. And so we're at a point now where we have more of it in our gas than we've ever had. It goes up every year. And a lot of people are concerned about that. Do you have any concerns about that, or can you address those concerns?
Well, the whole reason I started writing was in 2004, 2005. I was working in the Billings refinery, and the Montana State Legislature was trying to pass an ethanol mandate for the state. And Montana didn't produce any ethanol. So, there was so much misinformation around it. I started a blog, and I started writing about it, and I started correcting misinformation about ethanol. And the ethanol industry even put me on an enemies list. I was their enemy number 5 on their top 10 enemies list. But I was never an enemy of ethanol. But I wanted the industry to be self-sufficient. There's no reason that the whole of the Midwest couldn't be on an E85 standard. But they would much rather ship the ethanol across the country and have everybody subsidize them by force. I mean, we are subsidizing the ethanol industry by force because of the renewable fuel standard. And we got to a point where, the renewable fuel standard, we're saturated now on ethanol and gasoline. We've got as much as the law will allow. And so now they'd like to bump that up. They'd like to increase to 15% or 20%. And, I won't get into a big debate over ethanol. It's got its good points. It's got its bad points. But I get why it would be attractive to, create fuel in Iowa to burn in Iowa. But they create it in Iowa and ship it out to, California and Texas and everywhere else. And a lot of people don't like being forced to use a fuel, and that's what it is. I mean, the renewable fuel standard says you must use this fuel, and I'll bring down the wrath of the whole ethanol lobby, which I've done before by talking too much here about this. But the energy balance for ethanol is not that good. It takes a lot of fossil fuels to make ethanol, and it takes a lot of natural gas to grow that corn and to harvest it and so forth. But as a supplement, yeah, it's as long as you aren't degrading the farmland and filling up the Mississippi River with nitrates and so forth, to the extent that we could have a sustainable ethanol industry, I think that's a good thing. I just don't like, it being mandated. I don't like seeing corn grown in land that was conservation land that's now, eroding into the rivers. So, there's a lot of things that we've done to that have been harmful in the name of trying to push ethanol out there.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I read an article that you wrote the other day about Tesla losing their market share. And some of that, some of that is due to competition. There's more competitors entering that space, the EV space. But in addition, Elon Musk's customers are, people who want to buy EVs, and people who want to buy EVs are typically Democrats, left leaning, that's just how it is. Some conservatives probably buy some, but his big market in the U.S. is people that are going to be center or left of center. And your article was about his purchase of Twitter and a lot of the comments he makes on Twitter that are basically antithetical to the belief systems of a lot of his customers. And you kind of opined about how this is causing him to lose market share when it comes to EVs, because he's turning off his own customer base with his, social media content. Where do you see EVs going in the future? And if you want to say something about your article with Elon Musk, because I found that article fascinating. I think I read it. I actually read it like 3 times because I thought it was a great piece. So you can comment on that article if you like, and then just basically your overall view of where EVs are going in the future and how they'll affect oil demand, because that is a big question on a lot of people's mind, especially a lot of young people who think that in a couple of years we're going to be all EV and oil's going to go away. And I've tried to tell them that if every new car sold tomorrow was an EV, it would take us 15 years before half the cars in the United States were electric, because that's just how the maths. So just take a few minutes and talk about that, if you don't mind.
So I'll deal with Elon Musk first. I get hate mail from his fans every time I talk about Elon Musk. So there's some people that believe, well, he's the richest man and therefore, everything he does is some brilliant move. But I wrote the first article about a year ago, and I was starting to hear from friends who were saying, man, I would never consider a Tesla now after what he's done with Twitter and how he's really sort of showing himself to be pretty far right. And so I heard that from a lot of people. And I was just thinking, and I was on Twitter, and I was one of the blue checks that got unchecked by him. The whole blue check thing was I had to prove my ID because people were impersonating me. It happened all the time. And so with a blue check, you're talking to me and not some impersonator. So Elon Musk came in and said, no, anybody who will pay me $8 a month can have a blue check. And that was all kinds of impersonators popped up. So back to the point, the things that he was doing were alienating people on the left, and I could see it. And who are the customers for EVs? They're people on the left. And so I wrote an article last December, and I think it was titled, Why Tesla's Market Share is Set to Plunge in 2023. Now, I did note there's going to be more competition, and there's a lot of back orders for Tesla, so I don't expect this to happen overnight, but I think Musk has done serious long-term damage, and I know people who will never buy a Tesla now as long as he's with the company. And I know that's not just anecdotal. There's been articles about it now. So I was early, I think, in saying that, but now a lot of people are saying that. They say, wow, you've really ruined the company. And so the follow-up article I did, and 3 months later in Forbes, I had people commenting, yeah, you really missed it on this one. Boy, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, blah, blah. And I had to say, I didn't say it was going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. But there is no question, there's absolutely no question he's damaged his market share. Now, the question is how much? I think it's quite a lot because of the very customers who are going to want to buy Teslas. And so a report came out last month that said Tesla's market share had fallen from 65 down to 50%. Now, they had a very high market share because they were, first mover and people didn't have a lot of choice. But I think Musk is accelerating that plunge. And I use the word plunge because that's what the report said. It said, I used the plunge in the article last December. I said set to plunge, and they said market share plunging. And so I wrote that follow-up article, and I said, that's what I said. I said this was going to happen. And, I'll get hate mail over it. I'll get people who say, you're not a billionaire, and therefore, Musk he knows what he's doing. But I think he does know what he's doing, and I think he doesn't care. But a lot of Tesla shareholders, a lot of people who bought Teslas before, are getting bumper stickers that say, "I bought this before, before the Twitter debacle." I've seen bumper stickers that, want people to know this is not a $80,000 MAGA hat. I had this before, all this stuff. So now, where are electric cars going? I think in the long run, a lot of us are going to be driving electric cars. Now, of across the Midwest, I don't know how big of a deal that'll be for a long time because people drive long distances and it's very cold. And but California, I mean, it's a big deal. And I think in the long run, I think most of our transportation systems will be electric. And but it's going to be a bumpy road. It's not going to be, straight transition. It's going to take some time. And like you said, I've made this point about Norway many times. Norway leads the world in electric vehicle adoption, and they've got more electric vehicles on the road. And it took them a long time before they saw their gasoline dip, and their oil consumption has dipped almost none at all because their diesel consumption is going up. So, I've written about Norway several times. I said it needs to be a lesson to the U.S. that it's going to take longer for EVs to drop oil production, oil demand than we think. And therefore, we don't need to be canceling projects on the assumption that we're not going to need this because, we're all going to be driving electric vehicles in 5 years.
Yeah. And, I've often said that oil and gas industry executives, the people that run big oil and even smaller oil companies, these are not the roughnecks. These are very intelligent. These are people with PhDs. Like, these are some of the best business people in the world. And if EVs was going to supplant, or if renewable energy was going to supplant oil, you would not be seeing Exxon buying Pioneer. You would not be seeing Chevron buying Hess. These mergers and acquisitions, the consolidation you're seeing in the market, these oil companies are paying billions and billions of dollars to buy up their competition. And they're doing that for a reason. And that is because they know that oil is going to be here for decades and decades, and they're going to make their money. So I wanted to make that point. You brought up California, and there was one thing I wanted to address that we've never spoken about, and I don't know if you've heard my points on it. It's about California. And the point I've made about California, specifically California suing big oil for their knowledge of climate change, 50 years ago, and keeping it from the public. My stance on that has always been everybody knew about it. The government had done studies, Stanford had done studies, Yale had done studies, the CIA did their own study. All of these people knew about it, and they permitted that action to continue. And here we sit today with California, their number one import being oil from Iraq. Their top three imports are oil from OPEC nations. So while they are importing in some of the dirtier oil as their number one import, they're actively suing oil companies for doing something that they gave them license to do when they knew the effects of it. And that's the problem I have with the lawsuit. I don't have a problem with governments holding corporations accountable for what they do. But when governments give the corporations the means to do it and encourage them to do it, they've leased them millions of acres of land. Every drop of oil that's ever been produced in this country was permitted by a government agency somewhere, either a federal or state agency. That's where I have the issue. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so not only did they permit it, they profited enormously. They reaped enormous revenues from it over the years. And so you're going to sue ExxonMobil for, having known. ExxonMobil doesn't have a crystal ball where they have, the full truth. They're debating these issues internally, and some people are saying, hey, I think we're going to have a problem here. And I can tell you there were other people within that were wrong who were saying, I don't think so. But what they're doing is they're taking these internal debates and they're saying, well, you knew. No, they didn't know. They might have thought, but it's like you said, everybody else, there were papers in Science. California knew. There was this was no conspiracy. And besides that, since when is California getting the truth from big oil? Since when are they looking to big oil for the truth about anything? And so today, California is saying, okay, we're going to sue you, but they're still using oil. So I'm suing you for something that I'm still going to keep using it. It's like, I'm a smoker. I'm going to sue you for giving me cancer. I'm not going to stop smoking. I'm just going to keep using it because, because why? Because it's convenient, because the state runs on oil. The state, was historically one of the top oil producers, and the state benefited tremendously from it. So yeah, I think it's kind of silly to go and sue somebody when you were a willing participant. You profited from it, and you knew the truth. I mean, the truth was out there. You had access to all the scientific journals where there was warnings about this. It's easy with hindsight to say, well, yeah, they knew. But, in reality, a lot of people knew and wrote articles about it.
Yeah. And one thing I know that we both agree on is that climate change is real. I think we both agree on that. At least I've been led to believe that you believe that.
I'm in Arizona. I can tell you, we had the hottest summer we've ever had here, and those saguaros are falling over here. And it was a hot, we had a record number of days above 115 degrees. And yet I still run into people that go, oh, this is just normal patterns. It's El Nino. Yes, we got El Nino this year, but we've had El Ninos before. And if you look, we are setting temperature records year after year after year, and that has implications. It makes stronger hurricanes, and it makes for drier areas and wildfires, and there are all kinds of consequences. And I think the people who are still dug in and think it's not an issue are losing. And, but the thing is, a lot of them, I think they'll say, well, we were wrong, and we'll be all underwater by then, by the time they finally admit, yeah, this was really a thing.
Yeah, and honestly, I think one of the reasons there's still a lot of doubters is because there was a lot of predictions about the impact of climate change, where by a certain date, a certain thing was supposed to happen, and a lot of those, pretty much all of those predictions about the actual impact of it and how it would affect us in our environment have been way off. I think they kind of overshot themselves. Al Gore is a great example. And I think a lot of those predictions were done prematurely to raise awareness. But when you do that, you kind of set yourself up. You kind of put yourself in a spot where, hey, if your prediction doesn't pan out, the only thing that's going to happen is a lot of people are going to start doubting the whole concept of it altogether. And I think that a lot of the predictions that have been made about it is what has hurt its credibility, so to speak.
Here's reality. Okay, I'll give you reality. Reality is we measure and we know how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. That's a known. And we know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. That is a known. And so it is undeniable that raising CO2 in the atmosphere is going to impact the temperature. What's unknown is exactly how much. How much can the ocean absorb? These things models are put together. And I used to run a group that tried to model, they'd model oil and gas, would model a distillation tower, model a refinery. You're trying to represent reality. And you've got some inputs, and then you've got some outputs, and then you have to compare the outputs to reality. And when you say, okay, this didn't exactly represent reality, you have to go back and adjust the model. So you're trying to get something that represents reality. And over time, those models get better and better. And we can see, where things are headed. But, for anybody that doubts climate change, I just say, do you doubt that CO2 is increasing the atmosphere? Or do you doubt that CO2 is a greenhouse gas? Because you must doubt one of those things, unless you just doubt that the effect is large enough to do anything.
Yeah. Not off topic, but I think every single person in my family this year had to replace their central heat and air systems in their houses because because it's been so hot, for multiple years now. We've literally burned up all of our heat and air units, and every single one of us, like, we're looking at each other like, what's going on? Why are all of our air conditioning units going out? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they're running 18 hours a day now instead of 9. You know what I mean? And that's one of those little things where you can just see it happening in front of you and you don't know why. And I told my wife yesterday, she's like, isn't it crazy how everyone's central heat and air units have, our whole family, all of our units have gone out. And I told her, I was like, yeah, that's probably because of climate change. We've had record temperatures year in, year out. It's hotter for longer during the day. And these units are under a lot of stress, and we've burned them all up. And so I don't know. I think the heat and air business is going to be doing really well for a while.
When Houston is having a 100-year flood every other year, there's something going on.
Yeah.
We have so many, like it's a 500-year flood event. The next year you've got another one. Okay, something's going on.
So for a long time, I was of the opinion that and it's changed a little bit, but for a long time I was of the opinion that hydrogen would pass EVs, that hydrogen powered EVs would pass normally charged EVs, because of the simplicity, the convenience in filling it up and all of that. Now I'm thinking that hybrids are going to destroy everybody. What do you think?
So people probably don't know this. I work on hydrogen. We take oil field flare gas and we convert it to hydrogen and to take out the carbon. And so I've worked on hydrogen for a long time. The challenges with hydrogen, the energy density is just really low. So for a vehicle that burns hydrogen, you just don't have a lot of range. You don't have enough range. Like it's night and day with a tank of gasoline. And then fuel cells are just still really expensive. If fuel cells would get down cheap enough, the dream would be you've got solar panels that are providing electricity, and maybe they're electrolyzing water into hydrogen, and you've got a combination of electric vehicles, and you've got some fuel cell vehicles that are running off hydrogen that got produced from the sun, electrolyzing water. That's an ideal situation. But I think the electric vehicles are just well ahead of the fuel cell vehicles. It's just a matter of cost. I remember years ago reading about an actress who was driving around in a fuel cell vehicle, and it was like a Toyota Camry or something. It was $300,000. I mean, because it was just the fuel cell to drive it was just so expensive. And they've come down some since then, but I think they're still not super competitive yet.
Yeah, my little brother bought I think someone just mentioned it in the comments, a Mirai, I think is what he bought when he lived out in Los Angeles. I read an article the other day, I can't remember where I read it, but basically about half of the places in Los Angeles to get hydrogen, to fill up your hydrogen car, was out. And I don't know how it is now, but when my little brother bought his hydrogen powered vehicle, you had to go back to the dealership to fill it up, because where he lived, that was basically the only place to get it. I'm sure they've expanded their network now, but is there anything going on with hydrogen is that an accurate article, first of all? Do you know anything about it? And is there something going on that would cause that?
So hydrogen logistics are challenging because of the energy density issue. And I think most people don't know that probably 99%, definitely more than 95% of the hydrogen is produced from natural gas. It's steam methane reforming of natural gas. That's where almost all the hydrogen comes from. It can come from water, and that's in the long run, that's the hope, that electrolysis of water is where we get a renewable supply of hydrogen. ExxonMobil has been running a lot of ads. They're going all in on hydrogen. There's a hydrogen pipeline around Houston, but those have to be short, and you probably are aware of hydrogen embrittlement and so forth. So there are issues transporting hydrogen, and there's some challenges. And there's a lot of hydrogen produced around Houston because of all the refineries, but we just don't transport it around the country. It's not very efficient. Liquid hydrogen is extremely expensive to liquefy hydrogen, and then to keep it liquid and to move it around, there's a lot of challenges there.
Yeah. So you live in Phoenix, right?
I do.
And I've gotten a lot of questions, and I've answered a lot of questions from people in your area about gas prices in your area, gas prices in Phoenix, Maricopa County. I've talked about the pipeline situation there. About that area being at the end of pipelines. I've talked about the clean burning fuel that you guys use there. Is there anything you would like to address? Because I am sure there are people in the comment section from your area that have asked me questions. And I'm pretty sure I got it right when I answered them. But what's going on with gas prices in your area? Why is gas so expensive there?
Yeah, we don't have local refineries. And because California has they've got special standards, we can't pipe it over from California unless we want to pay a lot for it. So we're at the kind of at the outer limits of refinery infrastructure. Sometimes gasoline prices here are very out of whack with what they are somewhere else. Texas gas prices and gas prices here can be quite out of whack. But yeah, it's the issue you say. We don't have oil here. We're not drilling oil and we're not refining it here. We do have a nuclear power plant right outside of Phoenix, so my electricity prices are nice and electricity supply is stable, which it's got to be here because you have a major power outage here, people start to die. But yeah, the gasoline situation here is it's just we don't have local supplies, and so we may be dependent on supplies coming down from Denver, or we may be dependent on supplies coming across from Texas, and it can vary a lot.
Yeah. So a lot of people around the country have been experiencing very high natural gas bills, at home, their utility bills at home, very high natural gas bills during a time when natural gas is very cheap. As you know, natural gas has basically been, it's gone above $3 a couple of times in the last few months, but it's basically been below $3 for, I'm going to say the last maybe 16 months. That's just off the top of my head. Can you explain what's going on with utility bills and why people are getting, $500-$600 gas bills when natural gas is so cheap?
So this hasn't always been cheap, and it will spike up. So I don't think they're looking at high natural gas bills going into this winter. It looks like gas supplies are okay. Looks like inventories are okay. I do know that one of the largest suppliers of natural gas in the country is struggling because of poor profits and poor margins. So I don't know if natural gas prices are low and people saying my heating bills are very high. I don't know who's making the margins there in that supply chain, but I do suspect right now with natural gas, I usually make a natural gas price prediction at the beginning of the year, and I'll look at inventories and I'll look at natural gas production. The U.S. is going to set another natural gas production record this year. We've set records year after year after year, and that has helped keep prices in line. But with all the LNG terminals, that's probably not helping. People, would probably like to keep all that at home, and that would probably help keep natural gas prices in line. But, it does benefits Europe, benefits the rest of the world.
Yeah. I've had a hard time answering that question. I've had a hard time finding the data. My guess
administration will provide data for commercial, for electricity, for homes. That information is all at the EIA. So you can go there and look up natural gas prices, and it will break it out by all the different categories, and you can see where the disconnect might be.
Yeah. My guess was actually that as gas prices were falling last year, a lot of companies hedged their gas prices, and those hedges didn't run out. So even though gas, fell to whatever, companies were still getting a premium over, what the market price was. And I think that had a big impact on prices. I think there's a lag there between because natural gas got up to $10.
Yes.
And there's definitely going to be a lag there from that price to the low price when it comes to what you're paying for it coming through your front door.
Right.
So, Robert, this has been your first live, and while we got a minute here, you may not know what's going on, but I have moderators in the comment section, and what they do basically is keep the trolls out. They monitor all of the comments, and when people come in saying negative things or just being ornery, they boot them out. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank my moderators, because I don't know how many I've got in here, but I know I've got quite a few in here, and you guys have done a fantastic job because I haven't seen a lot of the trash talk. So I wanted to take a moment to thank you guys for that, for sure. Is there any other misinformation that you'd like to address that we didn't discuss?
People ask me, what is the biggest piece of misinformation? One of the biggest ones is subsidies. And I will talk about that sometimes because I'll hear somebody like Bernie Sanders, for instance, say, we need to get rid of all the subsidies. And you can turn around and point out to him that consumer subsidies are counted among the largest oil and gas subsidies out there. And this happened a couple of years ago where he said, we got to get rid of all these oil and gas subsidies. And I wrote an article. I said, the low income heating assistance program benefits oil and gas companies by making heating oil cheaper. And that is a tabulated oil subsidy. I've seen organizations will tabulate all the oil subsidies in the world, and that's listed there. It's listed. And you ask Bernie Sanders, well, should we get rid of the low-income heating assistance program? He would say, absolutely not. And so you say, okay, then you like some oil subsidies. You don't like others, but you don't say you want to get rid of all oil subsidies because you like some of them. And that's the case with everybody. Everybody likes some of them. People want to get rid of subsidies if they think it won't have any impact on them at all. But that subsidies aren't the U.S. government writing checks to ExxonMobil, and that's a big misconception. I've seen people say, we're propping those companies up. No, the flow of money of taxes from ExxonMobil and big oil to the government is huge. We're not propping them up. Now, there may be some subsidies. Like I said, you incentivize that which you want to encourage. So if we wanted to encourage more offshore drilling, there may be a subsidy for that. And you might say, well, they don't need it. Well, they might need it if you want them to do it and the economics don't justify it, but you still want them to do it, you might offer a subsidy for that. So, it's not like oil is reaping, big subsidies. They're taking tax breaks like everybody else does. But then oil subsidies, the single biggest category. If you see that oil companies have trillions of dollars of subsidies worldwide, the biggest category of that are subsidies that make oil more affordable. And Venezuela is a good example where, gas is whatever, a dime a gallon or something. The difference between the price the government charges and the market price is considered an oil subsidy. So if you look at those trillions of dollars subsidies, you'll see those categories in there. You'll see big, huge chunks devoted to just making gasoline cheaper. So I think that is a big, big misconception. When people hear oil subsidies, they think in their mind of the government writing checks to ExxonMobil, when in reality it's something very different. And it's not even something that the most liberal member of Congress would want to get completely rid of.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, the industry is a huge cash cow for the federal government and for the states. The federal government makes more money on oil and gas than the oil companies do. And the states make more money on oil and gas than the companies do. In addition, a lot of those subsidies are implicit or implied. So they'll say, well, this industry did, $10 trillion worth of damage to the climate, to the environment. So that's a $10 trillion subsidy. That doesn't mean the company was handed $10 trillion. That's, and how you actually measure the impacts of climate change like that is beyond my ability to do, right? Like I can't measure that. So
I saw a question scroll by just then that I will address. Somebody said, are you saying that the assistance to the low-income heating assistance program goes to the oil companies? Yes, it is making the consumer able to afford to buy that oil that they wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. Who is selling them that oil? The oil and gas companies. So it is enabling them to sell oil to a customer that might not be able to afford it. And we can say, well, we don't want people freezing to death. That's fine. That's not my argument. My argument is that is a tabulated oil and gas subsidy. So when, Bernie Sanders says we must eliminate all oil subsidies, he's not talking about that one.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, man. Well, Robert, we have run 30 minutes over. And I hate to keep you, I know you're a busy guy. Did you enjoy the game?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So for y'all that know, we actually scheduled this for after the Cowboys game. And I was happy that Robert said after the Cowboys game because I wanted to watch it too. But I have a very busy schedule coming up and I wanted to get this done today. I I think we're about done, man. I really appreciate you coming on here in front of this audience. I think we got up close to about 1,000 viewers at one point. Um, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close it out?
No, I appreciate it. I mean, you got my follower count up from 10 to 3,500 or something in a day. So that was I'll try to put some articles out. I'll put some videos out there. I'm not, my intention is not to compete with you. But you know, when I can answer a question or put up a video, and I do write a lot about investments, and I don't think you address that much. I mean, I write for Investing Daily. I write more about investments than anything, and I've been an investor for many, many, many years. So you know, I can put up investment advice, investment articles, general stuff. So I may do that. I have to figure it out.
Yeah. I I make a point to specifically not give people investment advice. Not that I'm terrible at it. It's just there's better people than me to do that. And like you, right? So and that's why I don't do that. So well, man, I'm gonna close this down. Once again, this was Robert Rapier, senior Forbes contributor. Power Play, was that the name of your book?
Yeah, it's Power Plays. Again, it's a little bit dated because it was really before fracking really began to make an impact. And so I don't even think I mentioned fracking in there, but I talk about energy issues. And there's a chapter in there about doing due diligence, you know, and that's how to sniff out BS. It's like you want to go out and look at something. Here's some questions you should ask, and here are some things you should know. So, you know, that's you know, I don't discourage people from reading the book because there's a lot of, you know, history of energy policy in the U.S. and there's you know, about nuclear power. You know, I try to cover the whole spectrum, but there are some things in there like fracking. You won't see any mention of that in there, but you know, and even the subtitle. It's energy options in the age of peak oil. I argued with the publisher about it. I said I don't want to have peak oil in the title of this book because I think that's been, you know, something adopted by a bunch of nutters. I get the concept, but a lot of people who are really out on the fringe have sort of flocked to that name, and I don't want to be associated with that. Yeah, it's Power Plays. People keep writing Power Plays, and then subtitle Energy Option in the Age of Peak Oil, which for the record was not my idea. So what happens now? This shows up on YouTube. You put this on your YouTube channel?
Well, it's been live on TikTok, and I will get a version of this. They will basically, you know, after some time, I will get this whole thing, and then I can just stick it onto YouTube. But I actually did have one more question to ask you that I forgot, and I just remembered. We've had 100 people drop off, but this was one question I really wanted to ask you, and I completely forgot. The new lithium discovery in southern and central Arkansas. You know, Exxon just made a big purchase. They're fixing to drill their first lithium well. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we do have a lot of lithium deposits in the U.S. in different places. The Salton Sea in California, there's a lot there. I'd say we need to be doing everything we can because, you know, when you look at the global lithium deposits, we are definitely in the minority. And we don't want to trade out, you know, our years of dependence on OPEC for what I wrote about a few years ago, OLEC, the Organization of Lithium Exporting Countries, because Bolivia is where all the lithium's at. And China is, you know, China's got the market cornered on batteries, and they've got, you know, you go get lithium batteries, you're going outside the U.S. to get those batteries. And I think we need to be doing everything we can. You talk about, you know, incentivizing something. We need to incentivize as much lithium production in the U.S. as we can, because that's a national security issue going forward.
Yeah, and one of my business partners in my company, his father is actually the original founder of what is currently one of the largest oilfield service companies in the world, and they are working on that technology to extract large amounts of lithium from water. And so the people that don't know in the comment sections, they're going to get this lithium from water, and the problem is the way you would normally do it is you would need a lot of water, and you would basically need it to sit there and evaporate. And then what would be left after it evaporated would be lithium and some other stuff. They have figured out a way to speed up that evaporation process with large quantities of water. And that's how they're going to get the lithium out of it.
You need a lot of surface area. The evaporation ponds down in Bolivia, I mean, they're huge area of evaporation ponds, and then they take the salts, and then it depends on what else is in the salt, because it can be very, very expensive to extract depending on the lithium concentration and what else is in there. I've read about the one in Arkansas, and I know there are some others around the country. It just depends. Economics very much depends on what is the concentration of lithium and what else is in there.
Yeah. Yeah. East Texas and that Haynesville area over smack over North Louisiana, Southern Arkansas, the water that oil and gas wells produce in that area are rich in lithium. And it's something that our company has looked at as well and has worked on as well. I wish all of our stuff here in the Western Anadarko Basin was rich in lithium, because we got a lot of water we could pull out of wells. But anyway, Robert, thank you so much for joining us here. I think it went great. Anytime you run long, it's because the conversation's good, I think. So, man, I'll be in touch, and hopefully we can do more stuff in the future. And I'll be seeing you on TikTok. I'll just close this out. Do you want a link or something to this when I do get it, or is there somewhere you want to put it? Or
yeah, if you'd send me that. And for people who don't know, I interviewed you about a week ago, and for a podcast called In the Oil Patch, and that should go live on Friday or Saturday after Thanksgiving. So toward the end of this week, I think we should see that live, and then you can let people know where to find that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks again to the moderators. You guys did a fantastic job keeping the trolls out. Can't thank you guys enough. And Robert, obviously, thank you for taking time out of your day, man.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Have a good Thanksgiving.
All right. You too. See you.